Hello, my name is Milani Douglas. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. On behalf of our Director, Susan Fisher Sterling, and our Board of Directors, it is an honor to welcome you to this evening's Fresh Talk. First, before we start, I would like to thank the Kobe Foundation. I would also like to thank for additional funding from the Share Foundation, the Share Fund, Clara M. Lovett, the Sue and J. Harry Carter, G. Phillips Exhibition Fund, Stephanie Sale, and Lenore G. Townie Foundation. And also for Women Art and Social Change, this public program initiative is brought to you through the leadership gifts of Denise Littlefield-Sobel, the Dory Davis Family Fund, the Rivada Foundation, and the Logan family, the Susan and Jim Swartz Public Fund, with additional support by the Bernstein Family Foundation, and this year we have been supported by the National Endowment for the Arts. The Women Art and Social Change program is an initiative. Our initiative, the Fresh Talk Edition, is a museum's signature program of curated conversations that provide a platform to advance creative ideas and some of the most pressing social issues. I also would like to give a tremendous thank you to our staff behind the scenes, Amanda Vercruz, Lisa McMahon, and then also we want to give a wonderful thank you to our security staff, and we want to say thank you to our StreamYard, our vendor. If you are caught online having our conversation this evening, please use the hashtag #FreshTalkForChange so that we can follow the conversation with you. I am delighted that you are able to join us for this conversation between curator Kerry Watt and featured artist Sonia Clark as they share with us questions, thoughts, and considerations inspired by the recent exhibition and survey of Sonia Clark's work entitled Tatter, Bristle, and Mend. Without any delay, I introduce you to curator Katie Watt and artist Sonia Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Milani. Good evening, everyone. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, how are you, Katie?
Very well. Thank you. So excited for this evening. As Milani said, I'm Katie Watt, and on behalf of the board and the staff of our museum, including Director Susan Fisher Sterling, who joins us in the audience this evening, I thank all of you for being here. Sonia Clark is a professor of art at Amherst College, and she is renowned worldwide for her mixed media works that address race and visibility and redress history. 100 of her works are on view at our museum right now in the exhibition Tatter, Bristle, and Mend. And this evening, Sonia and I are going to pull out a few themes from the exhibition. I'm going to briefly share images of works, and then Sonia is going to transform our thinking, because really that's what Sonia does. Next slide, please. So when you first enter our exhibition galleries, and I'm not going to talk about the chair right now, but we're coming back to it, nobody worry, you'll see numerous works made from human hair or black thread that approximates human hair, and or imagery that references the head and the adornment of the head. Next slide, please. Sonia, you and I were talking yesterday. Hair wreath was your earliest major sculpture to be made from hair. And you've described hair as the most essential fiber, and hairdressing as the first form of fiber or textile art. Next slide. Hair contains our DNA, and that carries genetic code from every ancestor who came before us. So I would say it really is the perfect material for making a strand of pearls that you might pass down lovingly in your family. And I want to mention to everybody that strand of pearls hangs down 1 yard. So it's about 72 inches if you sort of laid it out end to end. It is really a major statement. Next. This is skein, made from 80,000 strands of hair. At the height of the transatlantic slave trade, 80,000 people were transported from Africa to the Americas each year. Next slide. In 21, black thread is styled like hair. This wig has Bantu knots, for example, inspired by the hairstyling traditions of the Zulu people in South Africa. Next. And speaking of hairstyles, you French knotted a new do for President Abraham Lincoln, and our visitors agree with you that he looks much better with an afro. So next slide, please, Amanda. We're going to work from this compilation slide. Sonia, you present hair so often as an element of glory, but you also speak to the politics of hair, particularly in American culture. And so I wonder if you would speak to us about the kind of the range of expression that we see in these hair-focused works.
Right. I mean, it's thank you, first of all, Katie. Thank you so much to you and your team for everything that you've done behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. And I also want to thank all those who helped put the catalog together and the writers in the catalog and the photographers. So many people had a hand in this. You know, it seems like it's my solo show, but it's impossible without the team of people who made this happen. And this is the same way that I feel about hair. I mean, there's a way in which we look at a strand of hair and it feels like this is a hair plucked from my head, it's my hair. But in fact, in a hair it's the ancestral thread of all the people who have gone before you. So in one thread extruded from our heads is everyone who has come before us. And we could just as easily toss it in the bin, but it's this repository of our DNA. So it's rich, deep material. I think about how hair with the pearls that you were seeing here. I think about hair and politics in the sense that if you really think about what a pearl necklace is, it is an oyster who, you know, pearls are an oyster who have a little problem in their life and they can't get it out, right? And so they make this pearl, right? And then people traditionally would risk their lives to pearl dive, right? To gather up these tumors, actually, right? That become this sign of strength and fortitude. And so when I was making this piece about pearls using my own hair, it was also speaking about the strength and fortitude, what we value, how we value it, who we value, and how we value the, humanity. Hair becomes a place in which we are also looking at our DNA as being collective. You know, Katie, you and I grow very different kinds of hair, but biologically we are the same. You know? I mean, really hard to differentiate one from the other. And yet our hair holds that DNA that says, you know, Katie and I are essentially the same. But our hair also will distinguish us into races. So hair is this way of bringing people together and also talking about racial categorization, racial subjugation, racial creativity, right? Cultural creativity, and can be used in this way, either to talk about terrible things, like each strand of hair being a representation of the 80,000 people that were forcibly migrated in 1 year during the height of slavery. Or to talk about how Afro Abe, simply on a $5 bill, is much more valuable when he has an afro sewn on him. So this piece, I always say there are 44 of them that I made in honor of Obama, our 44th president, but not a one of these 44 sold for $5. They sold for much, much more of that than that. And of course, the value added is in the afro that I've given to the great emancipator. And also doing this sort of play that the emancipator is now, he's a subject that can be sold, right?
Yes.
So playing on that.
I wanted to share with the group, I mentioned this to you when you and I were chatting before about skein, that I was involved with the installation of it. So I had on a pair of gloves and the crew said, can you pick up skein and hold it while we're sort of moving the pedestal and so forth. And I mentioned to you, I thought, oh, it's hair, it's, you know, it's light, it's fluffy. And they set it in my hands and I expected it to sort of weigh nothing. And it is so substantial, Sonia. And it made me, I shared with some other folks previously, it made me feel in my body what 80,000 people means. So I love this sort of how, as you said, this individual strand of hair can actually manifest something really, really profound and really expansive. I wonder though, if you'd go back a little bit, I mentioned hair wreath being the first kind of major sculpture that you made. Do you want to share with us sort of how you got on this?
Yeah, so I had made pieces that that were about hair, but were not actually made from hair. And I should say, this is the first documented piece hair wreath is the first documented piece that I made with human hair.
Fair.
I had made a piece when I was an undergraduate student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago that was putting together the idea of my hair. So I used to have my hair like cut really short, crop, natural, right? If it was long enough to comb, then I had my clippers out. So I had a lot of hair. And I used my hair almost like a T-ball. And was thinking like this, and to speak about colonialism, I then had straightened hair that was the T, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that piece, there's no documentation. You all will just have to believe me that it was made. And then hair wreath happened because when I was a young professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, one of my colleagues, Mariama Ross, who had dreadlocks at the time, she grew dreadlocks very quickly and very fast. And so she cut them off and she said, you're interested in hair. Do you want to use these? And I thought, we grew up differently because my mother had this sense that you had to be very careful with what you did with your hair. It was ancestral presence, right? But also this sense that someone could do something bad if they had a strand of your hair. Which sounds a little superstitious, but I always point to like CSI or any of those shows, like you don't want your genetic material showing up at the wrong place, right? And so it was because Mariama grew up thinking, in a different way, like cutting her hair, do you want this? And I said, oh my gosh, yes. That it actually unshook something in me that said, I really can use this material, but I have to hold on to that part of me that feels like what is holding me back from using this material? What does it mean to use this material? And so hair wreath is pointing to Victorian hair wreaths, which were usually made from straight-haired people's, always made from straight-haired people's hair, and fashioned into flowers. In this case, the branches, to refer to sort of sankofa of roots and branches. The last thing that I want to say about hair and hair wreath is that it's, if the anthropologists have this right, then we are all children of Africa. So this idea that when you're looking at this texture of hair, it is standing in for people of African descent, but we are all people of African descent. And we can also blame the anthropologists for dividing us into racial categories as well. Yeah.
Indeed. All right, we're going to move on to our next theme. Next slide, please, Amanda. And right across from the sort of hair head section of the exhibition are works, a few works that depict hands. And I hope everyone can make out in this installation shot that very thin vertical line that is in the very center of the image. And that is, the next slide, please. That is this work called Touch, in which a long cord made from black glass beads is suspended from the ceiling. Next slide. And it ends in this itty bitty hand. It's maybe a little more than an inch across that reaches toward another hand that rests on the pedestal beneath it, almost touching it. Next slide. Near touch is this photograph of your own hand, Sonia, holding a puff made from strands of white hair that belonged to your mother, Lilith Clark. Next slide. Similar idea here in sculpted form, in which a hand that's, I think it's maybe about 2 by 1 inches, made from strands of your own dark hair, again, holds this precious ball of your mom's white hair in the center. Goosebumps every time. And hand work is often, I'm sorry, thank you, Amanda, that was great. Hand work is often referenced in your art. Unraveling is a performance piece in which you stand shoulder to shoulder with participants, and together you painstakingly remove individual threads from a Confederate battle flag. Next slide. I want to just clarify, we are exhibiting, unfortunately, just the flag portion of this work because we are unable to host the performance element because of the pandemic. Last slide. So I see a lot in these hands, Sonia, for me, this sort of sense of reaching back, maybe through history, seeking to have something handed down through the ages, holding on to something that is very sacred. In fact, am I onto something with hands here?
You are. It's really interesting, Katie, because I love to talk to curators, and I love to talk to anybody who witnesses the work, because they'll notice things that make me think differently. I'm still thinking about the weight of skein right now. Like, I'm still thinking about, I have to make a piece about the weight of hair. So with these pieces, actually, so if we look at my work and we try and do it linearly, and that's not the way that I think about my work, really. I really think about my work quite recursively, and I often say, like, my artistic journey has been very much like the curl pattern of my hair, you know? But there was a time that I was making headdresses, right? And then I started making things about hairstyles, right? And then I started making things using hands, right? Now, these are across several moments of time, so that's a recursiveness. But these beaded pieces that I was making using hands, at the time I was commuting. My life partner was in Baltimore, and I was in Madison. Those are not cities that you can commute back and forth to, and we did that for about 10 years. And so I needed a medium that I could carry on a plane with me. And so beads were perfect for that. So I taught myself beadwork, and started thinking about how much work my hands do for my ideas, right? You know what I mean? Like this embodied knowledge in our hands. And so this piece, Touch, what happens over time is that black hand that is extended from the ceiling, eventually gravity pulls it towards the red hand, and the tension between the two gets tighter and tighter. And that likens to something that happens in our own brains. You know, it's like the axon terminals between two neurons, just this little electric leap of faith from one neuron to another. And that is what is happening in order for me to sit up, speak, point, do anything, right? Is that these axon terminals are firing all the time. So to think about that, but also to think about ancestral connections. So the black hand and the red hand are making reference to Eshu, to make reference to a Yoruba deity, a messenger god that goes between the heaven realm and the earth realm, trickster who sometimes will mess up messages intentionally, keeps life interesting, right? And who is often depicted in Nigeria among Yoruba culture, the Yoruba people in Nigeria, and across the Yoruba diaspora in black and red beads. I just also have to say, to fast forward to unraveling the Confederate flag piece performance there, is that and you'll see this maybe in a future slide, is that the first piece that I made around this series, the Confederate Unraveling and Unraveled, was to actually take a cotton pieced Confederate flag and to completely unravel it. So my studio assistants and I went about taking it down to these 3 piles of completely unraveled thread, red, white, and blue. And it was actually my studio manager, who's pictured here, Meg Roberts-Arsinovic, who, as we were ideating about, you know, what pieces we wanted to make around the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. And at the time I was living in Richmond, Virginia, which, as you all know, was a capital of the Confederacy. That what would it mean to actually do the work instead of presenting the end game? What does it mean to actually do it? And so the performance evolved in that conversational space that happens in the glorious space of the studio with brilliant minds, if they're working there with you. And then, of course, my late mother, thinking about the ancestral threads. You know, this is my hair from my head making this hand holding my mother's hair. At the time she had black and white hair, gray hair. And so just plucking the white hair to make this small little pearl. But it's not only my hand holding her, but in our shared DNA, it's all of our mothers holding all of our mothers, and all of our fathers holding all of our fathers.
What I say, goosebumps, right? Yes. Next slide, please. There's a sort of cozy gallery in the center of the exhibition that features several works made from found objects that speak to our next theme, which is a deep one. We're going to take it in 2 parts. And the topic is visibility and consciousness. Next slide, please. So here is Breathe, which you made, Sonia, in 1994 from a found hand mirror. And in place of sort of silvered glass in the looking glass portion of it, you have sheets of mica. And you drilled dots through the sheets of mica to form the word breathe. Next slide, please. And of course, that word resonates powerfully with many people in this moment. I am conscious of that word today, but I really wasn't until recently. Next slide, please. You also altered a copy of Ralph Ellison's 1952 novel, Invisible Man, by perforating its pages. Next slide. And you have written, when looking through, something larger emerges. The holes make a new kind of awareness. Next slide. This is writer type, which is also in that sort of room in the center of the exhibition where the keys of a vintage typewriter are replaced with hairballs made from your own hair. When we consider writing, whether it's literature or history, whose stories are published, whose stories are read and taught. The title of this work is A Twist, obviously, typewriter, writer type. Next slide, please. And taking the replacement of those Latin letter keys one step further, you've developed your own font, which is called Twist. Its forms being based on the curl pattern in your hair. Next slide. So on this theme of visibility, Sonia, I'd like to pause for a moment and hear from you about these sort of smaller, more intimate works, which I feel are sort of a little more individual and personal. We'll get to sort of the larger pieces in just a moment. But tell us a little bit about what we see on the screen.
Yeah, so the thing about these long, long days, and I'm not just referring to these long days of the pandemic, but the long days of the beautiful cultures to which I belong, and the consistent subjugation of those cultures. And I say cultures in the plural because Black people are not a monolith. The constant subjugation of those cultures, like white supremacy is deeply embedded into this nation. And, you know, I think about when James Baldwin said, like, why did someone have to set up, a group of people have to set up a structure to subjugate other people? Like, what's going on with you psychologically? You have to, you know, hold, as a group of people, you have to oppress others. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, not you personally, Katie, not you, right? But the system of oppression. And so, and how much of that happens in very, very subtle ways. So this thing about, like, who gets to breathe?
Mm-hmm.
Who gets to be seen? Who sees themselves? Like, how the power of representation. Like, I remember, you know, just growing up, we'd get happy when you saw, like, there was a whole TV show that would have an entirely Black cast. Now that isn't even a thing so much anymore, but it's still also a thing, right? Mm-hmm. This idea of this nation so riddled with hatred and racial injustice and violence and subjugation, this carceral nation, these are long old days of this ugly business. And so though Breathe is the oldest piece in the exhibition, made in 1994 when I was a graduate student at Cranbrook, and given in exchange to a friend of mine who is a fantastic artist herself, Rita Grenzi, those same issues that we're talking about now, that are in the news now, they're not new. They're just news, right? And so that persistence and the refusal to accept white supremacy also persists. So Remington, the Remington 7 noiseless typewriter, the short version of this story is that I have a friend who collects typewriters too. He's Italian, and is a book publisher, so he collects Italian typewriters, specifically Olivetti. And his interest made me think about the object of typewriters. And so I went to Remington typewriters because, of course, they're American typewriters. And in digging into these Remington typewriters, I found out that Remington also was supplying the Civil War with armaments, because it's the same Remington as Remington guns.
Wow.
And then whose stories are told? This now becomes a story about pen and sword. Which has the power? Is it the power of the gun? Is it the power of the press, right? And this is what we're seeing today, whose power, how is that power articulated, and whose story is told. So this piece came very quickly. I'm always making hairballs with the hair that I grow, always, much to my husband's chagrin, there are hairballs everywhere. And then making them into this piece. And then when I made the piece, I said, okay, have I made an object that is pushing back at whose stories are muted and whose stories are amplified? Or am I making a piece that actually needs to tell its own story? And if it is telling its own story, it certainly would not be telling its own story through the lens of the ubiquitous Roman or Latin alphabet, which holds 40%, like 40% of the world. When you look at how much of the world uses the Roman alphabet, it is a story of colonization. Mm-hmm. And so to turn that on its head by making a font that speaks back to Africanity, speaks back to the center of humanity in the cradle, in the motherland of the continent of Africa. And I worked with a graphic designer by the name of Bo Peng. I cut off some of my hair and I said, Bo, I need it to look like my hair has fallen on a page. And this is what he came up with. And then Rita Dove, the brilliant poet Rita Dove, named this font for me Twist. And then the last piece I want to talk about in this slide is this connection between breathe and being invisible and without substance. This idea of using perforation as a way to breathe light and space. So actually absence becomes presence. Mm-hmm. By cutting the holes, by punching those holes, and my studio assistant did a lot of that work. That was Claire Cruz who did a lot of the work there. Punched these holes. Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man actually becomes more full by recognizing there is absence. Mm-hmm. And so you say, what is missing, right? Or is it that the lungs are now filled and now they can speak? So those are the kinds of things that I was thinking of.
Sonia, do you mind sharing? I think I remember reading a little anecdote about your mom and some glasses she had that were sort of perforated, the perforated lenses. Do you recall this? And it sort of reminded me of this work, and I think you might have told that anecdote in relation to this. But do you want to share that with the group? I think they would love that, just to give a little bit of Lilith to our evening.
Yeah, I'm happy. She's with me all the time.
Always, I know.
Unfortunately, I have not inherited the gray hair that both my mother and my maternal grandmother had. By now, I'm 54. I would be so happy if I had a head full of white hair, but clearly I'm not wise enough to have earned it, so I will wait patiently. So I made this piece in response to a couple of pieces that are held in the collection of the Tang Teaching Museum at Skidmore College. And I think that's probably where you read something about it.
I think that's right.
Yeah, what I was writing about it is that my mom had these glasses that they're actually not sunglasses. It seems like this weird thing. They're glasses that have these black plastic lenses, and in those lenses are all these perforations, and so they function like when you look through a hole, it helps your eye actually focus more, right? And I don't have Ralph Ellison's quote right in front of me that this piece is named from, which I should have, but I don't have it in front of me. But this idea of looking through something so that you see something more sharply. And so those glasses, while they were ridiculous, I remember when my mom got them, I said, Mom, like you just have, what is this ridiculous thing that you bought? And she was like, put them on. And I've worn glasses myself for a very long time. Since I was about 3 or 4, I've had glasses. And so I was just like, wow, those actually work. And she was like, see?
They do.
This way of, so in one sense, one might say that both breathe and being invisible and without substance are kinds of lenses to sharpen
Yes.
our vision.
My head is down here because I was desperately
You're
sort of
looking for
searching.
the
I'm looking for the quote because I definitely have it on the label, but you've really embodied in this work that sort of wonderful kind of signature statement from Invisible Man, of course. All right, we'll take the next slide, please, because now we're going to sort of think about some of the larger works that deal with this issue of a more collective experience, if you will, of invisibility or unconsciousness. And many of them do engage with the subject of slavery. I'll take the next slide, please. So we are showing for the very first time ever, we're the first museum or gallery to present this work, and we're so excited, your neon sculpture, Schiavo Ciao, which actually toggles, right? So the word Schiavo is illuminated for a couple of seconds, and then, next slide, please. Only the letters in the word ciao, C-I-A-O, are lit. The phrase ciao, as I learned from you, actually derives from the phrase schiavo, which in turn derives from an Italian phrase meaning I am your slave. Sort of a way of saying I'm at your service, but using very particular word to describe it.
Actually, Katie,
Do I have that wrong?
No, just to sharpen it a little bit. The word schiavo means slave.
Schiavo, slave. Okay.
Schiavo just itself means slave, right?
So ciao comes from, thank you for the clarification. Ciao comes from a phrase that sort of says, I'm your slave, I'm at your service. But it's this very casual reference to slavery. And I think about how often, when I was in school, I would say ciao, to be cute to my friends. And I didn't know that it was a reference to slavery. Next slide, please. This comb sculpture looks like a family tree, but it's a family tree that is truncated. It's sheared off, sort of suggesting the phenomenon of people being unable to trace their family roots in Africa because the knowledge of that lineage was severed by the slave trade. Next slide, please. Nearly every American is very conscious of the image of the Confederate battle flag. Almost none of us know the Civil War flag of truce, a dish towel that Confederate troops waved at Appomattox in surrender. The Smithsonian, the image that you're seeing on the right, the Smithsonian has half of the flag, and then fragments from the other half are in multiple collections. Next slide. But you know this flag, and you've made it visible. You've rewoven it in a number of works, including this one, which is in our exhibition. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Sorry. And the black stitches or sutures here figuratively, literally bind the two halves of a warring country back together. Next slide. This Victorian style slipper chair is covered with black thread braids, but only on the bottom and the back, the least visible parts of the chair, which speaks to the history of hidden and forced labor in our culture. Next slide. This is a work in our museum's collection, and it initially looks so mild. It's this delicate stem from a cotton plant, these cushy balls made from cotton and hair, but taken together, they signify the human toll required for cotton's production historically. Next slide. The cotton industry tells us, Sonia, it's the fabric of our lives. It's the fabric of our past, too. Next slide. So what I've learned from you and working with your objects is that our language, our history, our patterns of labor all seem to be freighted with facts and narratives that so many of us don't know or think about. And I wanted to sort of ask you, is revealing those stories a big driver for your work, or did you just sort of come to this through other means or different avenues?
Well, sometimes it just comes up in conversation. You know how I discovered the Ciao Schiavo thing was I was in Italy. I go to Italy a lot. I have lots of friends, dear friends there, and someone just said it. Like the Venice was this port, right? Which means lots of things were being traded in Venice, including human beings before slavery was racialized, right? And so the word schiavo in the Venetian accent gets softened to schiavo, to ciao. Literally, it's the same word, right? And then America models itself after this great European civilization, Roman Empire, right? Which means necessarily it says, well, we're going to need some slavery too. And actually, let's make sure that we have marked slaves. And so we're going to racialize our chattel slavery, right? So it's like, who are we modeling ourselves on? So the Roman Empire, everybody knows about the Roman Empire, right? But still somehow we say ciao and we don't know what it means, right? So those kinds of things happen in conversation over some Prosecco. And I think I have to make like 12 pieces. I got to get this out into the world, right? And similarly with the Confederate flag of truce, how many of us know just one of the Confederate battle flags so well that we refer to it as the Confederate flag? There were many Confederate battle flags, but you know the one, because you saw some images of it prior, the one with the X through it, which is not stars and bars. People say that all the time. It's not stars and bars, but the one with the X through it. We think of it as, that's the Confederate flag. Why do we know it? Because it's been propagandized to us, because we've seen it in the Dukes of Hazzard, because we've seen it with insurrectionists carrying that flag and the American flag as if these two weren't at war at some point, like conflating what is patriotism with what is insurrection. So to say, like, what would it mean if in our consciousness we actually had this humble dishcloth that was the closest that Lee's army could find to being a pure white cloth to use as a surrender or truce flag at Appomattox? They couldn't find one that was completely white. It has these 3 little minimal red stripes. How did I run across this? It was not through deep archival research. I walked into the National Museum of American History when I was doing research as a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow. I was actually at the African Art Museum, but I took a break and I went over to American history, and it was on display next to Lincoln's top hat. I saw the top hat from across the room and I knew it was Lincoln's. And then I said, oh, a piece of cloth. I'm a textile person. What's that? And when I leaned in, I just couldn't believe that I did not know this piece. So actually I have an entire exhibition that's up right now that's at the DeCordova Museum that is focused specifically on this work as a way of highlighting this historical imbalance. And then the last 2 things that I want to say about these other 2 pieces is that the one on the bottom right, iterations, also came up in conversation with, I have more things that I need to say, sorry. So it came up in conversation with a friend of mine, Bolaji Campbell, who is a Yoruba, Nigerian, by culture and heritage, and he's a professor of art history at the Rhode Island School of Design. But he was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison when I was teaching there. And he said to me that there's this sense of understanding that you're not an individual, that you're always walking with your ancestors. And this phrase that you don't know who you are unless you can name yourself 10 generations back. So to think about the complexity of, like, I am me, but I'm also my mother and my father, their mothers and fathers, their mothers and fathers, their mothers and fathers, their mothers and fathers, sort of a reverse family tree. So if you see that one comb that's touching. That's me. And then it's a reverse tree. Like all of those people gathered up to make the singular me, right? And all of them are in me. So it's not so much a cutting off. It's a sense of like all of those people are in me as well. The cutting off part is about the fact that I made these with fine-tooth plastic combs, right? So part of my heritage is that my great-grandfather was Scottish, not unlike a lot of African Americans or people in the African diaspora, multi heritages in me as this Black woman. And I can actually trace my Scottish heritage back 10 generations, but not my African heritage.
Right.
So it's speaking of that. And then let's see, I do want to say something about cotton, this fabric of our lives piece, because this piece actually speaks about another bit of history. One of the shifts of the cotton industry from the United States of America, it shifted to India, right? The cotton industry shifted from the United States of America to India. And this paper has been pricked and then stitched with synthetic hair in the shape of the cotton industry's logo. But it's stitched onto cotton paper that is called khadi paper, K-H-A-D-I. And khadi paper is homegrown, homemade cotton. Like, you know, when you think of Gandhi, like spinning cotton fiber, he was spinning cotton fiber for khadi cloth. So this not only speaks about the American relationship to cotton, the cotton and global cotton industry, but also the British Empire's relationship to the cotton industry in India as well, and that global connection. And then finally, this piece about, you know, what happens in the back 40, the hidden labor, is a great example of a piece that is both about, that was my intent when I made it.
Yep.
And the more I sat with this piece and the more that people said things to me, I realized that it could also be read as a throne for Madam C.J. Walker, who we'll talk about in a moment, I think.
Yes,
Right.
we will. We will. Okay, next slide, please. So, Sonia, you started to talk about sort of the complexity and the sort of reach of the history of cotton and cotton production in terms of colonialization and labor. I think even more so than cotton, though, sugar's history is relatively unknown. And the works in this case, I'm showing you a detail from the gallery that actually contains the neon piece, Scavo Chow. The works in this case sparkle and wink at you from across the gallery. We sort of use pin spots on them to get everything to really sizzle in the case. Next slide, please. And inside it are silver rings crowned with cabochons, not of gemstones, but cotton and hair and sugar on the right. Next slide. And these are positioned beside golden engagement rings set with lumps of rock sugar rather than diamonds. Next slide. And onto 2 $5 bills, you grew sort of these veritable reefs of sugar crystals. Next slide. But in the center of this gallery, I think is the most entrancing sugar work of all. Next slide. This is cotton candy flour, and it is a nest of dried cotton burr that holds up these shimmering pink and yellow sugar flowers. And you and I have talked about this work's terrible beauty. Next slide. Sonia, your parents were both born in the Caribbean, and their ancestors were forced to that region by the sugar trade, one of the engines of the transatlantic slave trade for centuries. So may I ask, was that familial connection what first drew you to the subject of sugar in terms of your body of work?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, sugarcane, when I go to the Caribbean, there's a smell in the air, and that one of those smells can be the smell of burning cane, you know? In fact, my great grandmother and my great grandfather ended up in Jamaica married. She was a Black woman, and he, a Scottish white man, ended up in Jamaica because of the sugar industry. Otherwise, they wouldn't have met. It was all Britain at the time, and here we are, the McCartys. You know, still, that was my mother's maiden name, and it's not a slave name. That was her grandfather's name. So these pieces speak, you know, I wanted to take really common objects, you know, and seduce a little bit, because sugar is seductive. You know, sugar gives you a sugar high. It was sort of the drug of the time. You know how, not so much now, but there was a time that, disturbingly, people would refer to heroin chic. Well, there was also sugar chic. And that was that gentry who had the money to eat lots of sugar would show off their rotten teeth, right? And so I think about these pieces, the gold rings that are holding these sugar crystals, and the silver rings that are holding both cotton and hair and sugar, cast sugar, that, you know, they're holding these stones, but also whose body would be wearing these rings, right? And even those ephemeral things, like the hair could come out and the sugar could dissolve and the cotton could come out, but still the structure that is holding those rings, that is turning people into commodity and people who into worker bees for this, you know, whatever the drug is of the time. Now it's technology, but that the structures are still in place, even though those materials might seem somewhat ephemeral. And yeah, the wicked beauty. I mean, I don't blame the cotton flower. It's not the cotton flower's fault that it's beautiful, in the same way that I don't blame a tree for being used as a lynching tree. It's the human intervention that makes those cotton flowers made out of sugar into terrible beauty.
I think for me, the sugar pieces are sort of among the sleepers in your body of work, because there's that wonderful push-pull in them. I've said to you, they're delectable, they're delicious, and yet the meaning in them is quite dark. Any word on Abe there? I said to my colleague when we were working on the show and working on the labels, I was like, look at it, it's beautiful and completely unspendable. I mean, it's sort of, again, it's kind of, it's just, you're giving it attributes that are sort of so unexpected, if you will. And I love that about the work.
I feel like he's drowning in one and blinded in another,
right?
At least two. Right. And I also think about sugar, like, you know, sugar doesn't go bad. And so it can be used to preserve things. But as I mentioned before, it can also rot, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Push pull. I love it. Okay, next slide, please. Our last theme this evening is inspiration, and specifically the inspiration that you draw from other creative folk. And you and some students at Virginia Commonwealth University beaded an amazing panel that's actually at the exhibition's entrance. Next slide, please. And it depicts South African Ndebele artist Esther Malangu painting a mural inside the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. This is on the wall, I think, entering their African art galleries. Next slide. And I always make people look at the incredible detail of the blue beads radiating out in concentric circles from the tip of Malangu's paintbrush. Truly a magic wand. Next slide. This is one work from an expansive series that you've made with a title that pays homage to Ntozake Shange's play For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. Next slide. And to make these, you wind thread around the spines of black pocket combs, and then you nestle them into an afro wig. Next slide. Hairstylists, you've made clear to me, are artists you deeply admire, and this section of the exhibition is devoted to activist and hair care entrepreneur, Madam C.J. Walker. That very large comb tapestry to the right on loan to us from the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Texas. Next slide. But this section also includes sort of more modest works, including this very luminous portrait of Madam Walker, made again by wrapping thread around the spine of pocket combs. Next slide. In 2014, you asked 11 hairstylists in Richmond, Virginia, to create styles for your hair, which you recorded in photographs. Next slide. And here are 3 examples. So you are at the right, showing us the back of your hair, and your collaborators are at the left in each image facing us. And these are the artists who designed the styles that we see. Next slide. Finally, you restrung violin bows with blonde hair and a dread made from your own hair. And next slide, please. Musician Regina Carter, who I believe is a friend of yours, used the bow strung with your hair, with your dreadlock, to play Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is sometimes known as the Black National Anthem, and the Star Spangled Banner on her violin. I heard audio of it. It's this sonorous, sort of very evocative, deep sound. And I think we're going to take a short break from the slide presentation so that we can watch a clip of Regina playing. So everybody hold tight. Wow, amazing. Sonia, oops. Before we go on to the final sort of compilation slide, can you tell us a little bit about how it came to be that Regina Carter was using your bow to play those songs?
I married well.
Indeed, you did.
Yeah, I when I was at Amherst as a student, I had a crush on a boy, and he was a young man, and many years later we got married, and he's a jazz clarinetist, and so he toured with Regina Carter for many years, and Regina has become a very good friend. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know, Regina is an amazing violinist, and also a MacArthur genius, a MacArthur fellow for her work in jazz violin. And what's embarrassing about this story is that I think this piece is dated in the 2012 or something like that. I've made several of these hair bows since, but that I've been married to a musician for so long, and it took me actually a Maya Angelou quote and knowing Regina Carter to say, hey, I could rehair a bow with hair. I mean, sometimes you have to laugh at yourself as an artist. You think, well, I'm not the quickest.
But you're deep.
But what I love about this piece is that it is, it's hair bows for sounding the ancestors. Mm-hmm. So when we think about this idea that on my head is, evidence all these ancestral strands, I don't remember my grandmother's speaking voice, but I can conjure her singing voice. Now, we were only on this planet for 10 years together, but I can remember a little bit of her mezzo-soprano. But when Regina is playing Lift Every Voice and Sing, it's actually activating our DNA. Mm-hmm. And so I played her first version of Lift Every Voice and Sing on the hair bows for another really good friend of ours, Jason Moran, who is another amazing jazz composer and visual artist and MacArthur Fellow. And we happened to be at the American Academy in Rome for two different reasons, but we were there together. And I played it for him and he said, can I remaster this for you? And, you know, I'm just like, how many geniuses do I need to make this artwork? Yes, you may. And so what you were listening to was Jason slowed down the tempo of it and really slowed it down, and then slowed down another one, and then overlaid them and returned it back to me. And his words, not mine, but just truth be told, made it bone deep.
Bone deep. Yep. Please,
yeah.
as we sort of get ready to wrap up this evening, I just would love to sort of hear your thoughts on the importance of other artists. You've given us a beautiful example in explaining Sounding the Ancestors, but is this something that you sort of have done from the beginning? Sonia, do you love kind of reaching out to others and involving them in the process?
I would say yes, and I would say that it's not limited to artists.
Okay.
So Regina, of course, and Jason, of course, they're artists, they're musicians, right?
Yeah.
Using the nomenclature around myself as an artist to amplify the work of the hairstylists that I work with, and say, if I'm an artist, they're definitely artists. Okay. So to claim more people in that fold. And I actually, so Esther Malenkou is like, I would love to grow up to be her. Here is an octogenarian who was free painting a huge mural, world traveling, everything. She walks in her traditional Ndebele dress, and she makes everything look better by her presence, right? Yep. She literally made everything in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts look better just because she was near it. Yep. And so to have my students, my beginning level students, work with me, most of them had not beaded for the first time, and to say, let us honor this octogenarian who was also a bead worker. She paints houses, she paints murals, and she does beadwork as well. Let's honor her with this hard, durable material. Let's make an heirloom that honors Mama Esther Malenkou. So yes, I have to tell you, everybody is invited conceptually into my studio because they help me make the work. Right. And so I draw that circle around who was an artist far and wide. I'll end with this, that just before the pandemic and we were sheltering in place, I had been in Senegal at a residency. And one of the artists that I learned a lot from was a man by the name of Suleiman Diop, who was making nets because he's a fisherman. But he taught me how to net, or retaught me how to net, and it's clear that he's a fiber artist as well. So that definition is very, very wide circle for me.
Well, I think that's an expression of your generosity of spirit, Sonia. I feel it in every object that you make, and spending time with you and speaking with you this evening, listening to you, enriches me, and I know it's enriched our audience immensely. It's a joy to be with you, as always. I thank you for sharing your time, your vision to our audience. I thank you for being with us. If you want to learn more about Sonia Clark, I invite you to, shameless plug, here it comes. I invite you to pick up our exhibition catalog. Thank you so much, Amanda, for the slide. Last slide, please. And I do want to mention that if you are able to come to the museum, if you're comfortable doing so, you can see all of these works and many more in Sonia Clark Tatter, Bristle, and Mend, which I'm so pleased to announce has been extended through Sunday, June 27th. I want to share a tiny anecdote about that before I sign off, which is that we decided very early on, Sonia, that we wanted to try to extend the exhibition, but the exhibition has 27 lenders. That's a lot. And you never get 27 lenders to agree to extend for a set period of time because there are other projects going on, there are other sort of demands on the works and so forth. Every single lender extended. And it's a measure of how they hold you and the esteem in which they hold you. And we do as well. So we're so grateful for this project, for you, for your time. And I thank all of you, again, who've joined us for your support of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Please keep track of all the wonderful programming we have to offer by visiting NMWA.org. And have a good evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much to you and your team.
Thank you,
Really
Sonia. All the best.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.